Yes, I'm Stephen Whittle, the museum manager here at the Atkinson.
Now, you have a very interesting tale about the painting that's next to you. How did you come to find it?
Well, I spotted it on a website just over 2 years ago. I was about to apply for a job here at the Atkinson as the museum manager. So I thought I'd find out a little bit more about the collection. All the oil paintings in the collection are on the BBC Your Paintings website. So I had a look through there to see what the Atkinson had and if there were any interesting or exciting works here. And I spotted this painting, which was listed as Unknown Artist Landscape. And it just occurred to me that it looked rather like a painting by Nevinson. So I did a bit of digging round, and I found a print that the artist had done in 1918 of the same composition, essentially. So that made it clear to me that this was probably a landscape by Christopher Richard Nevinson. So we had it cleaned at the Conservatories, and a signature came to light, which made it even clearer that that's who it was by. And here we have it on display 2 years later.
Are you pleased to actually see it now on display, listed correctly?
It's great to get it on display. I mean, it's a really important picture. It's something of a futurist masterpiece, really. Nevinson was the only British artist who was interested in the futurist art movement that came to prominence just before the First World War. So it's a really experimental picture. He went on to become probably the best known artist of the First World War, but in our painting he was just perfecting his style. He was trying out different things. He was particularly interested in the work of Italian artists like Marinetti and Severini, who brought ideas about futurism over to Britain in about 1912. So he's playing around with some of their ideas and also looking at Cubist art painting styles. He's obviously changed his mind quite a bit as he's worked on this painting. You can see where it's cracked in various parts. He's painted over wet parts of the painting and changed the composition. And that's evident when you look very closely at the picture, because there are different areas of texture there that are not quite right.
What is your favourite part about the picture? Can you point to it?
I find it just generally a very atmospheric and evocative picture. It's quite dark, and quite a dour painting in many ways. It's painted as an industrial scene, really, down at Limehouse Docks in London. So it's quite a modern take on the landscape. It's not picturesque or pretty or beautiful, but it's very down to earth. It's also very energetic. It's got these sort of lines of force, these angular compositional elements that make it really dynamic and exciting.
Do you think anything he's learnt from this has influenced his later work?
Definitely. I think he really perfected his style in 1913, and then when the war started and he went off to the war and was an official war artist, I think at that point he was really using this style in earnest.
What is the material that it's been painted on, do you know?
It's painted on canvas and he's used oil paint.
Is there any specific type of oil paint that makes him stand out, or...?
I don't think there's anything unusual about his materials or the way in which he worked. It's more about the style, really, and him being an experimental artist and trying new things, really, in terms of his choice of subject matter and the way in which he's painted it.
Do you think it's actually helped him with his war paintings?
I think he was interested in pretty dark subject matter to begin with. He was an anti-establishment artist who wanted to make a complete break with tradition. So in a way, the subject matter of the Second World War was ideal for him. For him as an artist, I guess it just happened at the right time, because he wasn't interested in making idealised, picturesque pictures of the countryside.
Now, the images have very dark silhouetted people on and stuff like that. It's very haunting, isn't it? Is it?
It is. It's very flat, the style of painting, pretty much like a Cubist artwork. So he would have been looking back at artists like Braque and Picasso and so on. But he still manages to make it quite atmospheric. It's not a completely abstract image. He's interested in atmosphere and the sort of dark underworld, I suppose, or the sort of industrial edgy landscapes that you get on the outskirts of London.
Looking at it, there's a lot of perspective actually built into it as well, which I'm rather surprised at.
There's some slight element of depth. So you do go back a little bit in looking into the picture, where you can see these tugboats and so on in the distance. But I think it's quite flat, really, and plain. Or I think most of the interest is kept on a fairly flat level near the surface of the picture, and is achieved that by having these strong, jagged lines across the picture. So I don't think there's a lot of perspective. It's more of an image, if you like, a 3D image, than an abstract painting by Picasso. But it still works as almost a semi-abstracted image, I would say. Yeah.
With the actual picture, do you know its provenance and how it actually came into being in possession of Sefton?
Yes, we know that it came from Whittle Museum and Art Gallery. They had an extensive collection of art in the early part of the 20th century. And a lot of their works were given to them by the Contemporary Art Society. So that was an important art collection initially. Unfortunately, Whittle closed down their museum in the 1970s, and all their works came over to Southport. So this particular picture has just been sat there for the last 40 or 50 years, waiting to be rediscovered and cleaned and put back on display.
With the rest of the actual exhibition itself that's on and show, what is your favourite piece so far, apart from this one?
There's a lot of interesting work in the exhibition. We've got a wall full of paintings behind me that are more modernist, forward-looking in style. And the opposite wall, we've got more traditional paintings, and it includes work by Southport artists like Philip Conard, who's an artist that I really like. It'd be great to do an exhibition just about Conard. So I'm very keen on his work. There's also work by another Southport artist called Adrian Stokes that's very beautiful. I think it's called the Papal Palace of Avignon. That's probably one of my very favourite things. Apart from that, there's a picture by William Roberts called A Tea Shop that dates from about 1938, I think it is, just before the Second World War. That's just really good fun. It's beautifully painted, and it plays around with perspective and the idea of reflections. So that's well worth looking at. That's certainly one of my favourite paintings. It's interesting to compare this painting on the wall here by Adrian Stokes with the one we've been looking at by Nevinson. So Stokes was a Southport-born artist, but he became very successful. This is a painting from 1922, so it's within 10 years of the picture by Nevinson, but it's obviously much more conventionally picturesque, I suppose. Stokes developed what people regard as a decorative art painting style. So you've got these beautiful silvery tones. He only uses 2 or 3 main colours really, and just keeps everything down to that simple decorative scheme, and then places these trees across the surface of the picture. So Stokes was regarded as a conventional or more traditional artist, but even so, he managed to develop his own very distinctive style. He wasn't somebody who was blindly following what other artists did, and he was very successful. So it makes a really interesting contrast, I think, with the more forward-looking modernist pictures that we've got in the exhibition. So we're looking at a picture by Philip Conard, who was also a Southport-born artist. In fact, I think he came back to Southport in later life, and he was president of the Southport Palette Club. This is a picture called A Pastoral. Again, I think this dates from the 1920s. Conard, again, was very successful, and there are paintings by him in public collections all around the world. So there's examples of his work in the Louvre, the Tate, and all the big national galleries from South Africa to America. But at this stage, early 1920s, he was painting in a pretty traditional academic style, I suppose you could say. It's still not a very detailed painting. If you look at it closely, it's quite broadly painted. There's very little detail, and you can see the individual brush strokes that make up these trees. There's not much shading or tone in the way he paints skin or the details of the clothing. And he also outlines the figures quite clearly. So it's almost like a graphic style. So like Adrian Stokes, he was a traditional artist, but he developed his own strong personal style. And that's what led to him being a successful artist in the first half of the 20th century.
Lastly, which image do you think is the most interesting for the public to look at? Which one draws the public in?
Which is the most popular image? I think a lot of people like Lilith, which is painted by the Honourable John Collier, and you can still see that today. It's exhibited in the foyer of the Atkinson. In terms of pictures in this current exhibition, or artworks in this exhibition, the Henry Moore sculpture is probably amongst the really popular pieces. It's so tactile. Ideally, we don't really want people to touch it, because your fingerprints tend to bring off the patina of a bronze sculpture. But it's modelled on a piece of flint. He wanted to create a piece of sculpture that you could imagine just holding in your hand and turning over and viewing from different angles. So that piece works really well.
Thank you, and good luck with the exhibition. And I believe you've got a lot more coming.
We've got a Lowry and Theodore Major exhibition opening on Saturday. And we've got an exhibition called The Eye of the Beholder opening the following week. And a couple of weeks after that we're opening the new museum, so lots to see really over the next month.
Good luck, and I hope it all goes well.
Thank you.